Hello, and welcome to 2019 Digital Differentiators, Content Strategy, UX, and Personalization. My name is Eric Wagner. I'll be helping to moderate this webinar. Over the course of the webinar, please enter any questions that you might have into the GoToWebinar platform. We'll be answering those at the end of the webinar. So today's webinar will be led by Samantha and Morton from FFW and Kevin from Siteimprove. The focus of today's webinar is on customer experiences and how brands are building fantastic digital experiences to improve sales and customer engagement. But before we jump into the content, let's do some quick housekeeping. So FFW is a global digital agency with European headquarters in Copenhagen and US headquarters in New Jersey. We provide a range of strategy, UX, design, and development services for some of the largest companies in the world. We have been in business for over 18 years and delivered over 2,000 solutions for a roster of over 500 clients. Siteimprove offers the world's most comprehensive digital presence optimization software. This software is used to create higher quality content, drive better traffic, measure performance, and more. Siteimprove has over 7,000 customers and has been in business since 2003. All right, with that, let's jump into the content. Sam, I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks, Eric. So good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I suppose, depending on where you are located. At first, I just wanted to take a minute to talk about why we're here, right, and why you should focus on customer experience. Primarily, I wanted to get everyone used to seeing CX as an acronym because more and more we're seeing it crop up in the digital space to refer to customer experiences. And when you think of customers and customer experience, traditionally people are thinking about call centers and in-person experiences at storefronts and the like. But we all are very well aware that increasingly things are digital, especially for our customers. And so the focus of today's webinar and what we'll be talking about is creating a digital customer experience that really goes above and beyond your competitors to help differentiate you in the digital space and showcase your products and services and your messaging in a way that resonates. So how do we stand out in that space? How do we make that digital impact? Eric, if you don't mind flipping forward. Today we're going to be focusing on creating a clear content strategy that really lays a foundation for your story and your strengths, creating user-friendly experiences that guide your user to where they need to go and help them accomplish their tasks. And then finally, what I think a lot of people are drawn to these days is developing smart personalization strategies that allow for certain customer groups or even individual customers to get the specific messaging, the specific content, and take the specific actions they need to take to accomplish their individual or group goals. And of course, all of that should be built on a trusty platform that meets your customers' expectations when it comes to digital trust and things like privacy, security, and accessibility. But we're going to talk about that in a webinar next week so that we can have time to cover everything. So if you would like to learn more about building that platform and building that trust, you can join us for that webinar next week, the 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern or 5 p.m. We have the bit.ly link there for you to register, and please join us. So without further ado, let's talk content strategy and user experience. One thing I want to mention before we really dig in is that there's a lot of information out there about, developing smart content strategies, doing, basic, great UX work. A lot of times you'll see guidance on how to create effective sitemaps and wireframes and content guides for your content editors. We're not going to dig too much into that today because what I wanted to focus on was more around the foundational pillars for your users to create that customer experience throughout. So really what we're talking about is going beyond those individual assets that often are kind of snapshots in time for what your business is doing at the moment, and really expand your thinking into establishing more your message and the tone of your business and creating a feeling for your customers that help them connect with who your business is and what your business can do for them. And then I would say almost most importantly is helping your customers, get through their tasks. And a lot of times people think about, physical spaces and how they can help their customers get to what they need. Storefronts and bank entrances and all sorts of things are kind of geared toward guiding customers where they need to go. A lot of times that gets lost digitally because people aren't thinking of it like a storefront and getting customers funneled to the area they need to go. And that's something we really feel strongly that you should be focusing on. So there's a few tools that you can use to help understand your customers and understand what drives them so that you can create that messaging, that feeling, that guide for them as they're, journeying through their experience with you. Again, we're not going to get too much into these specific tools today because there are whole webinars and whole series of materials around each individual one of these things. But just at a high level, there's a lot that you can be doing to help understand your customers. Everything from competitive research to figure out how you're different to, talking with your users and getting your users, your customers kind of hands-on with your materials. So a couple of things that once you've done this research and once you've kind of started to understand your customers, we feel are almost the biggest takeaways that you should be doing when it comes to content strategy and user experience are basically two kind of primary outputs. So one is an engagement map. And what that really means is sitting down with your research, with your information about your customers and understanding the different points of interaction that they may have with you, everything from when they first become aware of your business to, when they become advocates for your business and start referring their friends and family to you. So that whole spectrum of how they're making decisions, how they're interacting with you, each one of those points is different for your individual customer. And individual customers may come in at different points and have different experiences. So we feel that in order to lay a strong foundation of strategy and user experience, being able to really identify those different streams, if you will, and understand where people are coming from and what they're trying to achieve helps you to make all of those decisions later on that I was talking about that help create those pathways and those funnels that help your users achieve their goals. And so once you've done this kind of mapping exercise to say, okay, here's when these people are coming in, here's what they're looking for, here's what they're trying to achieve, here's how they're feeling, then you can start to create what are called user personas. And I think engagement maps may be a little bit newer to a lot of folks, but personas have been pretty persistent in the industry for a while. And basically, personas help you to create those user groups and start to identify the different traits that those groups have so that you can start to take those groups and make decisions. Being able to say that Jimmy, for instance, is an MBA student and here's his concerns versus Daniel, who's a professor, and here's his concerns, will help you to be able to identify the different elements of the page that they may be interested, the different pages they may be interested in, the different interactions and activities and tasks they wish to perform through your digital portal or your digital experience. And that becomes crucial to creating, again, that messaging, that feeling, that pathway that helps them achieve their goals. But one thing that I think a lot of people can really lose is that content strategy and UX fundamentally are meant to create a stable foundation for all of your users. And so I want to throw over to my colleague Kevin from Siteimprove just to talk a little bit about some of the users that often do not get mapped out in engagement maps, or personas that often are not created, but that are still extremely important.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. You're probably wondering what accessibility has to do with the user experience, and I can tell you it weighs quite heavily into this, as we'll discuss here. Most folks are still thinking of accessibility really only from that compliance side of things, and we will address that next week with the other webinar as well. But let's talk a little bit about the user experience and making sure that we're addressing all of the needs for all of our users. So my question for you becomes, how well do you really know your users? And there's a lot of different traits that we all have, and the ones that you'll definitely want to be aware of and think about are things like, are there mobility issues, age, cultural, geographic location, how these can all affect your users. Now, for example, if we want to talk about culture, we probably aren't thinking about English as a second language or a multicultural audience of users that we have that are coming to our institution. So, what am I saying that we need to offer the website in different languages? Not necessarily, but just be cautious and aware that language can create a barrier very quickly. And if you want to use geographic location as an example, we want to think about maybe there are still some customers that are located in very rural areas where they're relying on the website very heavily, but they may not even have a great connection at this point. Another example might be those retirees that are traveling in an RV. I think we call them snowbirds in this part of the country, and they head south for a few months or whatever the case may be. Well, it could be a connectivity issue where they're, not as connected as they used to be, things like that. So think about all of those different scenarios where your users are going to be interacting with your site. And I'd like you to keep this statistic in mind as well. 1 in 5 users may have some sort of disability that makes using your site difficult or even impossible. Now, when we typically think about disabilities, we think about vision or hearing primarily. Screen reader users, captions on videos, things like that. And those are important areas, but if you look at the overall statistics, we're not nearly 1 in 5 with those numbers. But once we start thinking about things like cognitive disabilities, like dyslexia or memory issues, or that English is a second language, as I mentioned earlier. We could be talking about things like ADHD, early onset Alzheimer's. There's a ton of different considerations there that play into this. Now, if you want to advance to the next slide, please. I want to give you a quick story, and this could in some ways link right back to the user personas that Sam was showing earlier. But I want to tell you about a friend of mine, and this is a true story. My friend Chris is a 36-year-old academic professional. He's a PhD professor at a university that teaches of all things computer science. Chris also happens to be paraplegic. He was hurt in a car accident when he was 19 years old, and so he has very limited mobility. And he relied on his bank's website mainly because of that mobility and living about 50 miles or so from where his bank's location was, and also the fact that he accessed everything with a keyboard. He's not able to use a mouse. So what happened was Chris's bank went through a redesign of their website and their online tools, and it completely broke the accessibility. Chris was able to utilize the site until they went through a redesign, and at that point, even after Chris had addressed the problems a number of times with the bank, he ended up having to close his account and move on to different provider because the experience was completely broken. And so this doesn't have to happen from day one. This can happen on a redesign or, an update as well. So we want to definitely keep all these aspects in the forefront as we're looking at those as well. Next slide. So what we want to do is we want to think about that user experience and allowing all of our users to interact, whether it is interacting with a tablet, whether it's interacting with keyboard only, screen readers, or just the regular use. A lot of times somebody maybe have a slight vision problem and they can rely on just the built-in browser tools to enhance that experience as long as we are able to utilize those tools in our designs. Another problem that we hear fairly regularly about the accessibility side of things is the guidelines restrict what we're able to do, and they really are not going to do that. What we want you to start to think about is those accessibility guidelines and rules. Just same way you would any other design constraints. More of a challenge. We've got a set of guidelines that we need to be able to comply with. Those aren't barriers, but they're challenges, and we can actually enhance our design for all of our users by utilizing those guidelines as well. Another example that would be branding guidelines. You've got a color palette that you have to use, or a set of fonts that you have to use, things like that. Next slide. So there's a few points for you to consider as you're going through these user elements from the accessibility point of view. When we think about cognitive aspects, it hits very heavily on here, and we want to think about the interface that's predictable. There are patterns that you've already developed, and we want to utilize those patterns. We want to make sure you can access all the way through with any device. If you have an action that you want to perform or a service that you're trying to access, then let's make sure that we can do that with any device. Okay, let's stick with familiar icons and imagery. And what I mean by that is things like if you've got a link to an email, let's use a standard email icon along with that to help our users identify that link. Speaking of visually identifying, there are a lot of keyboard users who are not relying on a screen reader to read what's going on, but actually can see what's going on. They just don't have the mobility to utilize that mouse. So what we want to do is make sure that visually we understand where we're at on the page as we navigate through with the keyboard. Visual focus indicators have been built into HTML and CSS from day one. We as designers have removed those visual cues very regularly. So let's put them back, and then let's rely on them to help our users navigate through. Be careful with form elements. We don't want to get frustrated by hopping around on the form and not going in an orderly fashion. Think about interacting with pop-up modals, dynamic regions, things like that, where there's quite a bit of activity on the page. Again, think about that pattern during a redesign. Are we adding or taking away widgets? Are we changing the way the general functionality of the site works with these new patterns? And again, let's keep it organized. Let's just make it scannable, and then let's eliminate unnecessary distractions. Now, this one is a little touchy because we typically have a whole list of items that we need to address with the web page, coming from a marketing department and coming from leadership and coming from all of these different areas where they all want a piece of that homepage, and that's understandable. But let's just be careful on how we're approaching that. Distractions can be problematic if you think about different ads or billboards and how they're used and approached, and things like carousels. We're starting to see a lot more analytic data on the ineffectiveness of carousels, and from an accessibility advocate's point of view, if it's possible to eliminate a carousel, then let's try to do that if we can. There's a website out there called shouldiuseacarousel.com that you guys can check out sometime. It's kind of a fun little take on carousels from the accessibility point of view. So I can address a lot of different issues, but this gives you kind of that foundational approach, the background that you're looking for considering accessibility functionality within the user experience.
Great. So before we move on to talking about personalization, there's one point that we wanted to underscore very significantly, which is that personalization and content strategy and UX are not separate things. Personalization is a subset of your UX and content strategy activities. In order to have an effective personalization campaign and an effective strategy for personalization, you must first develop that overall strategy, that foundational level of user experience that then you can tailor for individual user needs. Again, can't underscore that enough, because a lot of times we're seeing now people thinking of it as two completely separate things and having very disconnected strategies for personalization from the overall strategy. So if you're not familiar with personalization, we have a few different kind of webinars and things that talk about personalization in extreme depth. Today, we're focused more on the customer experience and the digital experience aspect of it, but at the very high level, personalization just allows you to create, user journeys or those pathways that are specific to individual users or user groups based on whatever parameters you've set. So for instance, as a user comes to your homepage, based off of data that you've collected about them, you may display different calls to action or different features that are specific to their needs. Another very common format of personalization are things like, I'm a ... and then you select I'm a student or I'm a teacher or I'm a parent. And then from there you go to a very customized page that's tailored all to your specific needs. In today's digital world, the most common format of personalization that folks encounter are things like social ads and ads through Google that are highly tailored towards them and geared toward specific analytics data or other data that leads the different businesses and groups to say, okay, I think this person wants this information, so I'm going to feed it to them. One thing that is really important about personalization is that it is not a magical bullet that is going to seek and find the very individual you want and get them to do what you want. There's a lot of different preparation and work that goes into personalization if you are kind of utilizing it to its fullest extent. So we wanted to focus today on the kind of 5 pillars, if you will, the foundational elements of personalization that will allow you to have great success with personalization. So things like understanding your users, having truly great content, having a technology stack that allows you to, conduct the activities and collect the data that you must conduct and collect. Being able to experiment is huge and a big part of that process of personalization, as well as staffing. So with that said, I'll kick it over to Morten to talk a little bit about a few of these pillars.
Thank you, Sam. So talking about personalization, of course, have to start with some users and understanding of the users. As Kevin mentioned, it can be who they are and which special needs they have. It can also be about where in the decision process they are at the current stage. It can be demographics. It can be their behavior. It can be all kinds of information that we need to have in order to spark the creativity and start working with personalization to that specific user's needs at this moment. And one of the main tools in the toolbox for getting an understanding about the user's needs and wants is to start asking more questions. Sam mentioned that the personas as a tool in the toolbox has been around for ages, and I bet all of you have heard time and time again that it's important to create these personas. Often we see that these personas are created. I'm not saying that you're guilty of this, but often we see that personas are being created based on some sort of gut feeling about who they are and what they would want. What we would like to do is to start asking more questions to these specific users. Again, it's not a new tool, but it's nonetheless a tool that we often see is being overlooked. There are different ways of asking questions. Of course, we can invite the users in to participate in the creative processes, but we can also just start using some of the tools that are available to ask these kind of questions. One of the questions could be, how are the users behaving on the website that we have today? And there are tools such as Hotjar, Siteimprove, we have with us here today, also have tools for creating heat maps, click maps that can give us a visual overview of where the users are clicking, where the users are focusing on our current website. And a simple tool as that often tells us a great deal about what the users are looking for. You can also tell us a lot about what they're struggling with. If we have a clear call to action that users are not finding because it's too far down on the page, or that they seem to not be clicking for some reason, then this is a visual overview that tells us that here is a problem. The darker the area and the coloring overlaying the website here, the more users have been clicking that element. These are relatively simple tools. They can not only tell us what users are clicking, but they can also tell us what users are focusing on. The lines on this image is an indication of where the user are hovering the mouse. This is a session recording, so we have tools available where we can record the specific user sessions on the website and then have a playback of what the user did. We often see that, we know from various studies that users are in quotes reading with the mouse. So they hover the mouse over the elements or the text or the images that they are focusing on. So observing where the users are hovering the mouse tells us a great deal about what they're looking at on the website. And then we can see if they're looking at elements we didn't expect, or if there's elements we were hoping they would focus on, which they didn't find. And then we can take all that into consideration, both getting a better understanding about the users, if we can see some patterns that users are looking for specific content that is not available on the website, or they seem to be more interested in the details about one product area that we did not expect, and they're not really interested in different, in this case, the enterprise notification in the bottom right corner of the website doesn't seem to get much attention. That could be an insight about who they are and what they're looking for. Another tool could be to use the polls, where we can prompt the users either broadly, any user on the website, or we can show it to a sample of 10% of the users, or we can do it based on some sort of triggers that if the user matches this behavior pattern, then we show a question to this user and ask if they would give us some more qualitative feedback. So there are relatively cheap tools available where we can orchestrate asking the questions in the right time and the right place on the website to get some immediate feedback about what the users are looking for, expected to find, or what they're struggling with. A couple of examples of specific questions we could ask could be something as simple as, what is the purpose of your visit to the website today? This is a question that we've asked several times on various different websites for clients here at FFW, and it always gives us a great deal of insights about which user intentions the user base have. For example, we had a B2B company in the shipping industry who asked this question and found out that 80% of the website visitors were there looking for a job. So that meant that when they were focusing on conversion rate optimization for the shipping leads, they only had 20% of the user base for whom it was relevant. So conversion rate optimization was probably, or was for them, not the right place to start. They should start with the user acquisition and attracting more traffic to the solution who were actually in the market for a shipping provider. So these kind of insights gives us a great deal of information, even though we don't get all of the users to answer these polls. Just the samples that we get gives us a great deal of insights. Another question could be, if you could change anything on the site today, what would it be? This is a question that is often, most often answered by users who have some kind of problem that they're not able to solve. So if they are unsatisfied with an area of the website, this is their opportunity to give feedback and get sort of off their chest. This question we asked for a web shop who sold women's shoes online. And the feedback we got from a number of women browsing this website was that it was a frustration to them that they were not able to sort the shoes on the page from the height of the heel of the shoes, which was probably a result of the web designer being a man and the shop owner being a man. So no one thought about that it could actually be a use case that you wanted to see only shoes with high heels or with not so high heels. So there was specific feedback that we could immediately put into to the functionalities on the website, and thus addressing one of the pains that the users told us that they had. It could be, is there anything preventing you from signing up, or for to get the immediate feedback about what problems they're facing? And this would often give us some qualitative input, such as I'm looking for this and that information, and I don't seem to find it, or I worry about these different considerations and I can't seem to find the answer, even though I looked heavily for it on the website. So again, something that tells us about who are the visitors, what are they struggling with, what are we not addressing, and again, some input from the users which we can use to spark the creativity when we come to building a better solution. Again, purpose of the visit today, we have covered that. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, Eric. Then of course we can set up tracking. You probably all have Google Analytics or other tracking tools set up on your website to gather some information about the user behavior and the use of the website in general. But it could be relevant to extract some of these data and then start to visualize them in a way where it becomes shareable with the parts of the organization who are not comfortable with logging into an analytics tool. So one of the things that happens when you start sharing data is that people start asking questions. I often recommend that data is being shared on the dashboard as part of the Friday bar routine, for example. Often we see not that we should ask our employees to only talk about work during Friday bars, but often it still sparks some creativity when people are in a different setting. That did you see that we actually had a high number of users who are looking for a new product, or did you see that there's a trend going on that that we did not expect? And by starting to share these kind of insights, then often from unexpected parts of the organization, new ideas for initiatives starts appearing. So that's a great way of supporting the creativity and supporting that the employees in your organization often are very eager to help addressing issues if you tell them what the issues are. So that's definitely a recommendation to start sharing data and start sharing information about what's happening on the website, just to look for solutions in places where you would otherwise not be looking. So these are some of the tools that you could use, which is technical tools or part of your tech stack that you could implement on your website and starting to get some feedback. Another thing, of course, could also be to just meet the users and ask the questions. So focus groups and surveys and workshops are also great ways of getting a better understanding of about what the users are doing. And this can also tell you something about what they're doing offline. So the other interactions they may have, which could again become part of the digital user journeys as well. So that's also a recommendation to ask questions in person, do the interviews, the old school communications and marketing tools. They still have a reason to be part of the toolbox. So if you go to the next slide, Eric. I will give it back to Sam to talk about content.
Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. So when we're talking about content, we really want to talk again off of that foundation of a global content strategy or a foundational content strategy. So again, everything that we talked about earlier regarding messaging and tone, you want to make sure carries through. But specifically, for this personalization focused portion of content discussion, what you really want to think about are how content is different for your different users. So for instance, Eric, if you'll kind of continue on to the next slide, different user groups are going to be focused on different components of your content experience. So you'll have, maybe a couple of people who are really in the decision-making phase and ready to act, a larger group of that will be still considering their decision, and then a majority of the folks will be really just interested in what you're saying and ready to kind of understand more what your business offers and whether or not that's a good fit for them. And so as this slide kind of demonstrated, there's the folks you can make money off of today, the folks you can make money off in the near term, and then the much larger group is the long-term investment of helping them get to understand you better, and on the tail end of that, once they have made their decision, keeping them with you and keeping them interested. And so once you can understand those different buckets and the different proportions of those buckets, it can really help you to narrow down which features and content you should be displaying on your website at which point for which users, and kind of that journey process for those groups or those individuals. And I think, Morten, you have a couple of examples of this process.
Yeah, that's true. As you saw on the previous slide, an exercise you can do on your website today, which is relatively simple to do, but often is, or I would say even always is very valuable to do, is to color code the different intention stages that the user could be in when they visit your website. So you have a color for the users who are there to buy from you. You have a color code for users who are there and looking for more information before they are ready to make the decision, and a color code for the users who are just there because they share an interest. The idea behind this is that share of interest, you could be visiting a bank website because you're interested in personal finances or investments, or even though you don't have any money to invest today, or even though you kind of are set and not are in the market for a loan or whatever it may be, they could still have a reason to visit the website. And by adding a color code to these different intention stages, then you can start mapping out on your existing website where are you addressing these different user groups. So if you go to the next slide, Eric. For Santander, they're not a client of ours yet, but just looking at their website from the outside, we can see that most of the content on the website seems to be to users who are in the consideration stage. So it's all about learn more. It's about information, answering questions you would have if you are not yet ready to make a decision. There's basically on the front page here no content for those who are ready to convert. There's only the learn more. There's no call to action saying if you have made your mind or made a decision, this is where you would go. You have to look for that. And if you go further down on the page, we can see that some more consideration content comes, and then there's a band of content that seems to be for users who just share an interest. It's not sales related. It's more content that you could be interested in, even though you're not in the market for any of the products that Santander have to offer. The interesting thing is that if I dive deeper into the website, they have forms available where I can find out or get some assistance in deciding which is the right personal loan for me. And here I basically tell Santander how much money I would need, which interest rate I'm willing to pay, or how many months I have to pay it off. So I basically tell them a lot of information about my financial situation, which they could use to make all kinds of intelligent decisions about what to display on the website. But if I, after filling out this form, I go back to the front page, I see that Santander have chosen to show exactly the same content as they did before. I can also interact with their frequently asked questions and basically tell them what I'm worried about. Are there any origination or prepayment fees? Are there any benefits of an unsecured personal loan? All of this also taps into what I'm looking at. But again, if I come back to the website tomorrow, on the front page, I see exactly the same content as I did on my first visit. And I have to look very specific for ways to become a customer. So they're not picking up any of the signs that I give them about who I am, what I'm looking for, what I'm struggling with, and what I'm interested to buy from them, which is quite interesting. They even have the content on the website, so they wouldn't even have to create new content in order to bring it into the mix. So if you go to the next slide, Eric, we can see that they have all sorts of content to structure to help me decide which kind of loan is the right for me. So it would actually be relatively easy for them to show this content to me. This content was only found because I was actively looking for it, even Googling if Santander had some content that could address this need. So it's clearly a missed opportunity that they don't recommend me to read this after I've clearly through data, if they had collected it, told them what I would need. So this exercise is relatively simple. We can all do it within an hour. Sit with the team, or even do it ourselves, and put post-its of different colors on a print of our website today, and see if there's any elements or any missed opportunities. If there's any elements that are only relevant for parts of the audiences, we could remove it for other audiences and then free up the real estate for more relevant messages. Could be features we could replace. Maybe a bit provocative, but an example that we've seen again and again is that I enter the website by clicking a link in the newsletter, and on the website I get prompted with opportunity to sign up for the newsletter that I just arrived from. So of course this is maybe a very simplified example, but it happens again and again. So this could be something that we could all start with today. It doesn't require heavy investment, but it gives us an indication about if there are user groups on the website that we're not addressing, or who we are not giving an optimal user experience. Going into the technology stack, of course, we can't do personalization without having some sort of technology to build the experiences with. There are some key capabilities that we need in order to do personalization. One is to be able to track the user profiles and maintain the unified customer profiles, so we get some information about the users all the way from anonymous to known to customers to repeat customers, and the ability to track their interactions in the user profiles. So it's not enough that we have our Google Analytics data in place. We need to have the user profiles as well with the aggregated data that we need over time. We need to be able to connect these profiles to a customer data warehouse or other data sources if we want to get really creative. We need, of course, to have ways to configure cookie consent, to make sure that we have the right permissions to track the users, the reporting and analytics capabilities in order to find the insights that we need in order to make the decisions about where to improve. These are all parts of the tech stack, and this is where it often becomes an issue to get started with personalization. So one of the input that we want to give you today, one of the things that we want to sort of inspire you with is that don't get stuck in that it can be really complicated, because we have some ideas for you that you can also start without getting into a heavy tech investment, but just by being creative. Experimentation is another one of the pillars when it comes to personalization, and this is from the when we go into this personalization endeavor, we basically establish a set of new hypotheses about what would work better than the baseline we have today. And without testing, it's really an incident if we hit something that is better than what we already have. At least we don't know if that's the case. So as a natural part of the process of coming to a place where we can provide a personalized experience is also to ensure that we measure and evaluate if we actually make better results by personalizing the experience, or if our hypotheses to begin with were wrong. This is a really important step. Just as with anything digital, we need to make sure that we can prove the value of our initiatives. We had an example where we tested. The hypothesis was that users were not aware that we actually had free shipping if they ordered for more than $100 in a web shop. So we added a top bar saying that if you order for more than $100, you would get free shipping. Should be quite an obvious case. And we even joked in the office about how many of us on the team, we were 6 people, believed that the old variation was better than the new one we came up with. We were all completely agreeing that the new one was better, but it actually showed in data with 99% statistical significance that we decreased revenue for this web shop by 12.5% by doing this. So even though 6 of us were completely sure, and none of us believed that this could be any risk, we actually made the wrong decision were it not for our testing capabilities. This is a really interesting case, I believe, that there can be something that we overlooked, something that we didn't think of, and only data will show us if our hypotheses were right. Yeah, so that's also part of the pillars for personalization. And then the last pillar, again, over to you, Sam.
Sure, yeah. So I imagine there's a lot of you thinking right now, okay, this is a lot of great information. It also seems like a lot of work, especially as Morten was mentioning, the tech stack can be very intimidating. So we wanted to share just a couple of insights when it comes to staffing that may help set your own mind at ease, or at least give you a little bit of direction. And the first is just a better understanding of, what's really the most important thing here, and why is staffing something that we felt should be a pillar. And this chart here shows the results of the Future of Marketing survey done by eConsultancy in 2018. Over 150 people responded to this in the level of marketing directors and VPs of marketing and communications, those types of roles. And as you can see, the first few results, the top reasons why organizations hold back on trying some of these new things with technology really come down to people and training and understanding, because the technology can be very scary, but even more so, some of the concepts and the reasons behind doing some of these activities even can get lost if this isn't, the skill set or the training that your staff and your team has. So our approach as an agency, and one that we recommend for all teams, is the multidisciplinary approach. Because as hopefully you have seen throughout this presentation, there's different components that go into creating something like a personalization campaign. And it starts with, your analytics team and goes all the way through the process to that experimentation and validation and user research piece at the end. So really, when we're talking about a personalization project, we're talking about involving every member of your team or every member of our team to really work together to get design, content, tech, insights and optimization and research all working together to kind of formulate this overall strategy and plan. And one note that I want to make sure that we definitely hit is that accessibility is a running theme throughout each of those pieces. When you're talking about laying that foundation for all of your users, each group should really be focusing on all users throughout the process. Everyone from your analytics team who's gaining insights should be thinking about it, all the way through to your developers who are implementing some of these strategies. And so between the tech stack and this multidisciplinary team that you need to do personalization, you might be wondering, okay, so that's a lot. Well, we have this quick little getting started guide that kind of builds off of what Morten was saying earlier with regards to the quick activity you can do now to analyze your content, experimentation and hypothesis testing that you can do now. And we kind of call it the crawl, walk, run approach. So Morten, did you want to run through these really quickly, or did you want me to knock them out of the park?
Absolutely, I can do that. The idea here is, of course, that as briefly mentioned, it can be quite intimidating, and it can be turned into a 6-month strategy followed by a 6-month implementation project, and then a year from now you get started. But what we would recommend, highly recommend, based on experience from working with several organizations about how to get started with working in a data-driven manner, using these different data points to optimize the user experience, is to start with the most simple setups you can come up with. Because what happens as soon as you do the first have the first personalization experiment set up, the teams start becoming more creative. They start becoming more engaged in the process, and they start becoming more curious about what else could we improve. So crawl optimizations in this terminology would be personalizations you can set up today with no need for collecting additional content or creating additional content, with no need for collecting additional data, but just based on what you already have. So an example could be aligning the landing page and the front page content with the campaigns that you're running in other mediums. I saw not too long ago a phone company who had an offer in a banner ad, which was placed in all the larger medias here in Denmark. And they had a particular offer that I was interested in. And when I clicked the offer and I went to the website, the offer was not there. It was the product was there, but the wording from the banners were not available on the landing page. And when I entered the front page, they told me something completely different. So without collecting any additional content other than that I came from this specific campaign with the UTM tags that they already have on the banner links anyway. They could have easily adapted the content to just reuse the same wording that triggered me to click the banner in the first place. So they had the content in the banner, which could be copied into the website. They had the information about that I came from the campaign, and they could have used that to optimize the user experience. And that would probably have a better chance of converting me into a paying customer. If we become a bit more ambitious, and we have done the first couple of crawl initiatives, then we can start do personalizations where we collect simple data points and then maybe create some additional content. So an example could be if we track that users have downloaded a white paper on a specific topic or signed up for an event, which indicates that they are deeper in the funnel than most of the first-time visitors. We could try experimenting with more aggressive calls to action on their next visit. Now we know that they know us. We know that they've trusted us enough to download one of our white papers. So we could maybe dare a bit more when it comes to trying to convince them into to getting in touch with us. So again, something that doesn't require too much, requires maybe a little bit of data collection, and probably we could set it up within definitely not weeks, but days or maybe even hours. And then, of course, when we've become more and more advanced in our approach, we can do run personalizations, which would often require heavy involvement of multiple stakeholders within your business to define a business case, because there would be some costs involved with setting up the data collection, creating content, maybe even providing new features. So an example of this could be to integrate your website with the CRM to get an understanding about how many of your visitors on the website have bought product A but never considered product B. And we could start doing upselling of complementary products to our existing customer base. So this would require that our CRM experts becomes part of the team. We would require some technical implementations, and often it would take quite a bit longer to get this up and running. But the value of doing that would also be much greater than with the very simple experimentations. So the main idea here is that there is activities that you could do today. Doesn't require much. And then, of course, there's the very ambitious initiatives that we've been talking about, which would then maybe be more relevant when your team is getting their feet wet and starts to become more engaged in the process.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Morten. I know we have now reached the top of the hour here, and I think we were going to open it up for some questions. I had a couple of questions that came in over the course of the webinar. So I guess I'll start there. The first one is it possible to collect data so we know if persons with disabilities are using our website? For example, if users are visiting our site with a screen reader.
Yeah, this is Kevin. I can take that one.
Sure.
That's a really good question, and it's actually kind of a controversial question. What we're dealing with a lot of times here is users' privacy. And so while there are some very good supporting reasons for tracking that, just the way the technology works, the screen reader actually sits on a user's machine and on top of a browser. Right now, there's no clear way to track if somebody is utilizing assistive technology like a screen reader. So there may be some ways to do that in the future, but until we determine whether it can be used in a positive or a negative manner, right now the best option is to just go ahead and use good, clean semantic coding practices, follow those guidelines, and offer the same experience to everyone.
Awesome. I had one more that's pretty similar. How important is it to build customization into the user interface? For instance, user experience personalization like font sizing and theming.
Yeah, that is fairly similar. That practice has kind of gone away. Again, if we're utilizing the native semantic elements, we're using a good heading structure, list elements, things like that. There's not a real need for that customization because if there is something like a high contrast theme, for example, or if someone has the ability or needs the ability to increase the font size for magnification, they can be done within the operating system and the browser pretty easily. And most users that rely on that are probably going to have their equipment preset anyway. If you want to continue to offer things like that, it's not problematic. But if again, I'm going to continue to talk about utilizing clean semantic markup and providing the functionality directly within the HTML, the CSS, things like that. So I don't discourage it, but I don't think you need to really go to the extra work in most cases now.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I don't see any other questions at the moment, but I did want to say thank you to everyone that attended today. I really appreciate it. We will be, I guess, in contact with everyone here today and send over a free Siteimprove report that will feature a score for a number of different aspects of your website, including accessibility. Yeah, if you have any additional questions, we're happy to answer those. And thank you so much.